All right, good morning. Happy to have everybody here for our Gulf South virtual compliance webinar. I am Dawn Smith. I am the compliance practice leader for all of the South region here at Hub. Today, I am going to talk you through several different requirements, but we're going to start with the compliance and benefits update, and then we will end our day today with a little bit of HR and AI updates as well. As we start through, you'll see a couple of agendas. Just know we have a lot to talk about. We will get through everything as quickly and hopefully as efficiently as possible for you today. We want to start with the industry trends. For those of our clients or our friends who have already renewed this year for 2026, you are aware that it's very expensive to renew in 2026. If you haven't renewed yet, hate to tell you, but please buckle up. We are looking at an expensive year. But this isn't just expensive from a health insurance perspective. In general, everything is more expensive. I often talk about going out to lunch with my family. The last time I went out to lunch with my husband and my son, we spent $150 for the three of us to just have a casual lunch, nothing fancy. Healthcare costs and the services behind those healthcare costs are no different. We are seeing those exact same increases across the board. Those increases, to some extent, are coming from competing priorities. They're coming from leveraging AI, vendors who are increasing their costs, as well as the actual services that are being provided. The unit cost increases and the pharmacy costs, or we're seeing a lot of, communication and noise. We've talked to a lot of clients where they say, hey, our pharmacy costs are 50% or more of our claims. Some of that are those fun GLP-1s that we talk a lot about, or cell and gene therapies. And some of it is just the education around it and making sure employees understand there are other options to them. When we're looking at unit costs and services provided, things of that nature, we have a lot of healthcare industry clients who tell us, hey, the government has essentially told us we are taking a $2 million and sometimes a $4 million hit on specific services because they're not going to reimburse higher than X dollars. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I don't know a lot of companies that can just take a $2 or a $4 million hit and say, maybe next year will be a better year. So what we are seeing is they have to take those costs and spread those out elsewhere. So in those cases, these services being provided are not the same costs as they were last year in other areas as well. A really common question I get asked as well is if I think the ACA is going to go away and the subsidies and the penalties. I'm really sorry to tell everyone, I do not think that that's going to happen, at least not in my lifetime, but that is one that I would absolutely love to be incorrect on if that were to happen. I think the subsidies and the penalties are a very high line item for the IRS. I do believe that those are going to continue throughout probably at least the next several years. But because of those subsidy drops, we are seeing increase in employer spending. We're seeing more and more employees having to enroll in the group health plan, whereas previously they were able to get those subsidies. So there's a lot of constricting things that are happening for employers that are saying, hey, costs are going to rise. But don't worry. Here at Hub, we are working to become creative. We have created a whole national team, and all of our service teams learning to find other ways to adapt. We are looking at, okay, what worked 5 years ago is not going to still work for our current employees. Unfortunately, we can't do what we've always done and stay competitive. So we're looking at captives for clients. Sometimes a PEO makes sense. Sometimes we're looking at an ICHRA or those individual coverage ICHRAs. Maybe it's a pharmacy carve-out. Our goal is ultimately to make sure that you have all the different ideas available to you, and let's determine together what makes sense. Where can we find some differences for you to maybe bring down some of those costs? But what I'm warning everybody is every shiny object is not your friend. What I mean by that is there are a lot of illegal schemes out there that look really exciting. They promise you hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in federal tax savings. And unfortunately, a lot of them are illegal. If somebody is promising you millions of dollars in federal tax savings, let's take a deeper dive into that. A lot of those schemes are illegal. A lot of them are very creative and very well hidden to the illegal pieces of it. They're getting very good at those schemes, but not every shiny object is going to be your friend. Some of this is going to come down to education as well. From an employee standpoint, we also want to make sure, hey, our employees understand there are other options to them. I am one of those where I actually have an autoimmune disease. I've had it for several years. And the first couple of years of that, I was not an educated person. I didn't understand what other options I had available to me. And I was one of those high claimants that was increasing cost across the board for all of my colleagues. But I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know that my high claims, one, could be lower, or two, that was causing an impact for everybody else. I think it's important in 2026 and 2027, as we are seeing these cost changes, for employers to bring employees in part of those conversations. Now, don't take that as me saying, hey, go find all your high claimants and put them in a room and tell them to stop being a high claimant. That's not what I'm saying. But I think it is important to educate and say, hey, do you know that there are other facilities who can do x-rays cheaper than maybe going to the emergency room or the hospital? Do you know that there are things like Trump RX that are, possibly another avenue, or direct to consumer programs that can offer cheaper pharmacy benefits where they still get the same benefit, it's just costing them and the plan less. And I think it's also important for employees to know costs are rising. I've heard a lot of employers doing their best to make this cost increase not impact their employees. I think that's a wonderful idea. I love when employers are trying to do more for their employees. But also, I think it's important for the employee to know, hey, our insurance went up this dollar amount. While we're eating majority of this as your employer, we do want you to be part of that conversation. We want you to know that increase is happening. We want you to know why sometimes the increase happens. And now we're going to spend the next year educating employees on ways to maybe help the plan run a little better, maybe get healthy. Maybe it's a great time to bring in Hub's H&P team or the pharmacy team to talk about other options that could be available to them. We're going to have a huge rise in artificial intelligence, more so than we already have. We have a lot of AI use cases related to, in general, just your HR administration. We're talking benefits administration. Some employers have put up chatbots for their employees. Some vendors that you have might already have those chatbots available. We also have AI-assisted recruiting and onboarding processes. This is a really great way, hopefully, for employers to be able to become more efficient and do more with less resources. We do hear a lot of teams say we just don't have the resources to, hire a new employee or bring somebody else onto the HR team. Hopefully that AI is going to be able to assist. They're going to be able to detect fraud and automate some of those things. But we always will tell you, AI has its risks. AI is not a human, but AI does learn from you as your humans who are utilizing it. And we will go further in depth in this later today, but there's a potential risk for discrimination with your AI. There are data privacy concerns, whether it's in your firewall or sitting outside of your firewall. Being in your firewall does not mean that every data privacy concern is covered and you don't have to worry about it. But you also have to still make sure there's a human in place. We have seen a lot of AI denial of claims where there's not a human reviewing it on the other side to say, oh, maybe this shouldn't have been denied. And we are seeing a large increase in legal scrutiny and class action litigation as well that is tied to AI use in employers across the board, whether it's with your health plan or whether it's with your employment basis. So AI has its risks, and it should never be something that is 100% relied on. All right, so now we're going to move over to fiduciary litigation. Many of you know that fiduciary is probably my second favorite F word, but when we look at fiduciary litigation, I want to look back to some of the cases that we've talked about in prior years, because I think they're important. We had the J&J lawsuit, the Wells Fargo lawsuit, and we talked a lot about how employers have to be good fiduciaries to their group health plan. No matter the size, small or large, being a good fiduciary is a huge impact right now from a federal government and from a lawsuit perspective. But many of these lawsuits are simply based on not doing their homework. When we look at bringing in contractors, recently, my husband and I had to bring a contractor into our home. We needed new floors. We've had a few floods in our house that caused us to do some renovations we weren't expecting to do. But it meant that we were going to take a day, go through, find every flooring company around our house, figure out which floors we liked, but ask the deep questions. Are your contractors 1099 individuals? Are they W-2 employees? What is your process? What is your agreement with them? Reading the contract line by line to make sure that these are really the people that we wanted to have in our home. And when I say in our home, these guys were hard workers. They were in our home for anywhere from 12 to 16 hours each day that they were there. But we felt really comfortable the first day they showed up. We did our homework. We knew who they were. We knew what to expect. But when we were driving around, we also did a lot of research on each of those companies that we were looking at. And ironically, a lot of their bad reviews were reviews that clearly the individuals writing the review didn't read the agreement. They didn't ask the right questions. They didn't read the contract before signing it, because all of those things they were complaining about were covered in all of those conversations. That's what these lawsuits come down to. These employers didn't do their homework when bringing in employees or vendors. They didn't ask the right questions, and they didn't save the right documentation. They didn't have a strong fiduciary file to protect them or the employees who were maybe exercising that discretion. This year, and probably next year, you're going to hear a lot about the Schlichter cases. The Schlichter cases are really looking at voluntary benefits. Now, there are two sides to this conversation. The first side is whether these benefits were even subject to ERISA or not. I think this one's going to fall off pretty quickly. When we're looking at a voluntary benefit being subject to ERISA, in all honesty, the word voluntary doesn't really matter. Voluntary is just a word they put on there at the beginning to make it sound fun and exciting. It doesn't mean that it's not subject to ERISA. When an employer endorses a plan, that's when it becomes subject to ERISA. Employers oftentimes endorse plans whether they mean to or not. If you add it to your benefit guide, you're endorsing the plan. If you're picking the benefit that they can offer, you've endorsed the plan. Choosing the carrier, you've endorsed the plan. Offering it pre-tax. So as you can see, it's all the things that you're going to do in general when you're putting together your offerings for that year that mean you've endorsed that plan. So I don't think there's going to end up really being a question about these benefits being subject to ERISA, but the question is whether or not they had other options. So I want you to think about having a financial guy. This financial guy is somebody you vetted and you trust. And now he's telling you that every time you make an investment, he wants you to put all of your money into one fund. He's my financial guy, I trust him. I'm gonna put all my money into that one fund. What happens if in 3 or 5 years you find out that every time you put money into that fund, that financial person received a kickback? Feels a little dirty, doesn't it? Now you're wondering, okay, was me putting my money in that in my best interest, or was it in the best interest of my financial guy? Was he really not my guy? That's really what the question is coming down to with the Schlichter cases, is did these employers have other options, or were they forced into specific options because there was a kickback situation happening? All of that is alleged. We'll hear in the next year, 2 years, how that's going to shake out. But I think it's an important lesson for employers. When you're being presented options, whether it's vendors or benefits, there should be more than one option. And if there's not more than one option, ask why. There might be a business justification as to why there is only one option. Great. Document that business justification, put it in that fiduciary file, and protect yourself if somebody does try to later claim that you had kickbacks happening and you chose specific vendors or specific benefits for the benefit of yourself or others. And if there are other options available, still write down the business justification for the reason you pick the option that you do. And always make sure that that business justification has your employees and their beneficiaries' best interest in the forefront of that conversation, because that's really what being a good fiduciary is all about. You hear me talk about it time and time again. Your best practice is going to be documentation, having a good fiduciary file. Maybe you need a benefits committee for all the vendor selections. I really like when there are multiple people involved. If you have somebody who's going to submit terminations, you have somebody who's going to deal with termination of the employee, they should be both part of that COBRA vendor selection, because they need to understand how that process is going to work, because they're going to be explaining that process to other people. But it also allows you to have multiple people that are looking at the due diligence. I say all the time, you outsource the work, you do not outsource the liability. It can feel like it's going to take a village to babysit your vendors. Make sure they're truly doing what you're paying them to do. Make sure they're charging you a reasonable expense, and that you can document what they're doing, save it to your files, and keep that for future you. Your fiduciary file is all about future you. Now, that could be actually you, or maybe you transition into a different role or task transition. You want to make sure the next person that is coming up behind you has this, and that person is saying, okay, I know why so-and-so did what they did. I can see the way their brain worked. I can see the documentation they compiled, and I can see why they made the decision and how they made that decision. And I can also see that they continue to babysit these vendors through that process. All right, section one and two are over now. Now we're going to move into the prescription drug landscape, because I know this is a top line item for a lot of people this year. And I will tell you that here at Hub, we have a fantastic pharmacy team. If you're feeling strained, please reach out. We're happy to talk through some different options. I am going to go a little quicker through some of the regulatory and transparency things that are changing. The reason I want to go a little quicker here is because I want you to understand that none of this is really finalized. We are seeing federal regulations come out for prescription drugs. The expectation is that they are going to improve transparency, really reevaluate all the roles of the PBM in general. We're seeing states come out with rules as well as the federal government. But none of this is really set in stone. So while you'll get copies of this deck after today's call, please know that this is just what we know today. It doesn't mean that that's what's going to actually happen in the next couple of years as they roll all of this out. We are expecting some new transparency obligations. These came from the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2026. Now, effective January 1st, 2029, or any plan years that begin then or after, there are going to be new updated data and documentation available for employers. PBMs are going to have mandatory disclosure requirements for large employers as well as some small employers. This one is not going to be just ERISA large employers. This is going to be ERISA, non-ERISA plans, small groups, large groups, government plans, church plans. Everyone is going to be able to get some sort of documentation, but your group size is going to change a little bit. Now, when we're talking about transparency for this specific piece, this is like going to a restaurant. You sit down with a table of 8, you get a menu. The restaurant doesn't tell you what anything costs. You just have you get to decide what you're going to actually eat. You can have steak, chicken, whatever you want. And then at the end of the meal, they give you a bill. That bill just has everybody's total lumped into one number. You still don't know what each individual plate costs. That's kind of how it is right now when dealing with PBMs. Employers don't have the ability to see all the details, all the costs that they should be able to see. Now, this is kind of the sample of what we think the PBM reporting could look like. Again, this very much could change between now and January of 2029. My hope is that maybe by January of 2028, we have the best set kind of regulatory idea of what it's going to look like. But as you can see, a lot of small groups are going to get more documentation than what they've had before. But where we're going to see that divide is maybe the drug level data or the high cost drug formulary data and information, those kind of year over year changes. That's where we expect that to be the large groups only, but they have not said there's going to be any difference for ERISA versus non-ERISA, just that sizing. With this, we do expect that there's also going to be some portion that has to be relayed to employees. We think there will be a plan participant disclosure requirement as well, some sort of document that employers will have to issue to their plan participants, most likely on an annual basis, but there is a possibility it could be more often than that. As this evolves, if it's an annual basis, it would be something that we would provide to our clients as that time is necessary based on the conversation and agreements that we have with PBMs. But again, more to come on that. Obviously, they're talking about penalties already. They love their money. They're throwing out numbers like, you know, $10,000 per day penalty for failure to comply with the notification. But again, I think that's all about having the right partners in place and making sure they're giving you the notification so you can meet that obligation. We also have some proposed DOL transparency. This really comes down more to spread pricing. When we talk about spread pricing, it's like getting concert tickets. If you're buying it from a reseller, you know you are paying that reseller more than if you would have bought it directly when it first went on sale. The question is how much more? That's where some of this transparency is going to come to. Now, PBMs are going to have to disclose how much they're actually paying to the pharmacy versus how much the employer or the plan is paying in. There's going to be disclosure requirements. There's going to be certain employers that don't comply or don't have to comply with this, or PBMs. This one is going to be for ERISA only plans. So your non-ERISA plans typically are not going to get this information. And we do expect it's going to be for large level funded and self-funded groups only. More to come on that though. If you weren't in that group that I said we think it's going to be a part of, give it time. That could evolve, that could change, you know, over the next couple of years. With the new regulations, as I said, we are expecting sometime in the next 18 months for regulations to be issued. So please be cautious as you are seeing all information and communication come out, what you think is going to be actual versus what is still kind of phantom myth, thinking about what could come down the line. As regulations are finalized, that's the pieces we want to save for those files, not any that are just mythical and we don't know if they're actually happening. I mentioned the states have been very busy as well, and that's because those states have been. We have many states who have already come up with their own prescription rules and fees and things of that nature. Now, I know some of you are in a couple of states like maybe Louisiana or Mississippi, and you know that, yes, there is some impact there. There are some regulations coming down the line. Once those regulations are finalized, we would put those on here. The reason they're not on here is because they're not finalized yet. And we don't want to start talking about something when it's still in that mythical state, because we want to make sure what we're telling you is truly what the regulation is. So more to come on those specific states. But the importance and the reason we still want to talk about the other states is because this has also drawn a lot of questions and some lawsuits. A lot of times, these are going to impact our self-funded clients. Well, in a self-funded world, we often claim preemption with ERISA. The problem with that claim and these regulations is that many of these regulations are a fee that the state is charging to the PBM. And then the PBM is, of course, passing that fee on to the employer because they don't want to eat that cost. The ERISA preemption is only if a state is trying to actually change the design of an employer's plan. A fee being charged to the TPA by the state is not changing the design of the employer's plan. Now, we do have some lawsuits going on where employers are saying, even though it's just a fee, that it does mix in with the ERISA preemption. We'll wait to see how these current lawsuits play out, but if history tells us anything, the courts are going to side with the state. In prior cases, the courts have said this does not impact ERISA preemption. The states are allowed to charge a fee. Now, any of these rules where they actually are changing the design of your plan, that would be different, but it's really going to look down at what the regulation is and what the regulation is trying to do to know what kind of a case an employer has. All right, now we're on to One Big Beautiful Bill, or OB Cubed, as I love to call it. OB Cubed was signed in July of 2025. The biggest impact for the health and welfare plan was the telehealth services and direct primary care arrangements, as well as dependent care FSAs, or those flexible spending accounts. From a telehealth perspective, prior to COVID, you might remember a time where employees actually could lose eligibility to contribute to their HSA if they received telehealth services below the fair market value. We've had this on again, off again, love-hate relationship with these rules over the last several years. OB Cubed finally made this permanent. What that means is that as you renew, you as an employer have a choice. You can charge telehealth at fair market value, or you can charge below the fair market value, or eliminate the cost sharing altogether. Regardless of what you choose, you will no longer impact your employees' eligibility to contribute to the HSA. We've also had an increase in direct primary care arrangements in the South. This really gained popularity kind of on the West Coast and has slowly moved over to the South. A direct primary care arrangement, honestly, is like a gym membership for direct primary care services. You pay a monthly fee, you get to see your direct primary care as often as you want by making appointments, but you're not charged a fee per appointment. Now, these are also popular in the way that some direct primary care arrangement services are not going to take any of your insurance. So you are paying out of pocket for those expenses or that monthly fee. When we look at what the federal government has done for employers and employees, they're now allowing HSA to have something to say with this game. They're allowing employees to utilize HSA funds and allowing them to maintain HSA eligibility as long as they also are enrolled in a qualified high deductible health plan. Previously, if they had one or the other, they couldn't have both. But there are rules around this, and one of those rules is the limit for the monthly fee. And what I mean by the limit for the monthly fee is that the employee cannot be paid more than $150 per month for an individual, or $300 a month for more than one individual. Now, the reason I bring this slide up is I want to make it very clear that this only impacted HSA eligibility. So I'm going to geek out for just a second on tax code. When we look at HSAs, those are governed by tax code 223. Oftentimes, when we're talking about qualified medical expenses and things of that nature, we are talking about tax code 213. 223 was the only thing that was impacted. So I tell you that because FSAs, HRAs, out-of-pocket medical expenses, those things are not impacted and did not have any eligibility changes. It truly is only the HSA for the direct primary care side. And then dependent cares. Dependent cares went up this year. Employers can allow employees to contribute up to $7,500, a very large increase from the typical $5,000. Now, if you've talked to me in the last year, you know I probably haven't slept since July 5th, and that's only because this one does terrify me a little more. It terrifies me because we have roughly about 85% of clients who fail non-discrimination testing when it comes to dependent care accounts. If you offer a dependent care account you are required to do annual non-discrimination testing to ensure that you don't have too many highly compensated employees contributing and not enough lower compensated employees. It's an unfair test, but a lot of employers fail it because highly compensated tend to want to contribute more, or they tend to max out their contributions where maybe the lower compensated are not maxing out the contributions. So if you're increasing to the 7,500, my warning is test early. You can do a pre-test. That pre-test will tell you based on current contribution structure if you're going to fail or pass at the end of the year. If you're going to fail, you can stop those excess contributions before they ever happen. I am pretty sure, hopefully I'm going to be right, that telling an employee, hey, we have to stop your excess contributions is going to be a much easier conversation than saying, hey, we didn't test early, we should have stopped your excess contributions and we didn't, and now you have 2,500 or 3,500, whatever the number is, of taxable income that we are going to add back to your W-2 at the end of the year. I'm trying to find, the less of two evils there, but I think that being able to be proactive will definitely be an easier conversation for employers. All right, so now to kind of the meat and the potatoes, our foundational compliance requirements. Many of these didn't change because the consolidated appropriations didn't have all of those hidden things that they had a few years ago for us. ACA affordability is still based on 3 safe harbors: rate of pay, federal poverty level, and W-2 safe harbor. That means that every year during your annual renewal, when you're talking about contribution structure, you should be ensuring that your plan meets the affordability calculation. It should be on one of these 3. If you have tipped or commissioned employees, you are unable to use rate of pay. You must only use federal poverty level or the W-2 safe harbor. For 2025 renewals, affordability was 9.02%. We were excited about that. It was much better than the 8.39% in 2024 for employers. In 2026, it is increasing again. It is going to 9.96%. That means you as an employer can choose to pay a little less if you need some flexibility in that cost. My recommendation is that you're just confirming affordability is being done every year and saving that in your file. Now, it's going to be easier to comply because the rate went up, but it is going to be more expensive if you do not comply. This is the largest increase in one year to the next that we have seen in ACA penalties. Typically, we saw somewhere between $7 to $15. Last year, we actually saw a decrease and we were all kind of shocked. What? The IRS doesn't want our money? Well, this year they said, oh, that was a mistake. We did want your money. And so we're seeing $30 and $40 per employee per month differences when it comes to those penalties. Right now, the IRS is actively looking at and auditing the 2023 calendar year for those ACA reports. If you are getting a penalty letter, please send it over. We're happy to talk through, we're happy to strategize what went wrong, how we could maybe be a better partner, or how we can help through that process to make sure it's intentional. Sometimes you can get a penalty letter intentionally. Hopefully, if you're on this call, you've already submitted your 1095s and your 1094s. Your 1095s were due to be made available to your employees by March 2nd. Your 1095 with the 1094 was due to the IRS by March 31st. A large employer, meaning anyone who has 50 or more full-time or full-time equivalent, don't forget your part-time employees do count in that equivalent count, must file the C-Series form. Where I see probably the biggest mistake is our smaller level-funded or self-funded employers. Just because you are a small group does not mean you don't have to do reporting if you are level-funded or self-funded. Those groups do still have to file. They just file a different series form. They would file the B series form. If you're sitting there listening and say, oh, I don't think that we did our C series or B series or even know what those mean, reach out. Happy to have that conversation and talk through to see if maybe there's a miss. We also have new distribution methods. There are options to make them available upon request, depending on funding type, depending on if they're employees, non-employees, and make them available electronically. Please remember that to distribute your 1095s electronically, you must have electronic consent. Your ERISA electronic consent is not the same electronic consent. It does require separate communication, a separate conversation for electronic delivery of those 1095s. Said reach out. And the reason I say reach out if you think you've missed reporting is you kind of have a ladder for penalties. For the first 30 days, the penalty is only $60. After the first 30 days and before August 1st, it goes to $130. After August 1st, we go to $340. At some point, they also will throw in an intentional disregard for federal filing requirements, and that goes up to $680 per form. And when I say per form, that's per form per employee with no max. So definitely want to catch any misses as early as possible to hopefully reduce that penalty as much as possible. Now, you might remember many years ago where we all could possibly be penalized when we filed our federal tax forms if we did not have medical coverage that was ACA compliant. We still have that federal law. There is still a law that says individuals must have minimum essential coverage that meets ACA compliance. The difference now, though, is that the penalty for non-compliance was moved to $0. However, we do still have some states who have a state individual reporting mandate, meaning you might have an extra step that has to go to the state taxing authority as well as the federal government. If you have employees that sit in Massachusetts, they have their own form as well. Their form is the 1099-HC that tells their employees if they meet the Massachusetts requirements that are also on top of the ACA requirements. So please be very cautious if you have employees who sit or work in any of those states. Over the last couple of years, we've also told you about some HIPAA updates. When we're looking at the HIPAA updates and the requirements, there was talk about reproductive rights and there was talk about the substance use disorder. The reproductive rights was vacated. However, the substance use disorder was not. That means that employers who have access to personal health information or PHI must update their HIPAA privacy policy. If you have access to that PHI, you also have to make sure you have a HIPAA privacy policy. The updated language is just going to include how you would utilize, why you would utilize the substance use disorder patient records that you might receive. If you're sitting and saying, I haven't done that yet, I don't know what language, or I don't have a policy in place at all, reach out. We do have templates available for our clients that we can give you either just that updated language, or we can get you started on a complete new policy so that you can roll that out and feel like you are protected and compliant when it comes to your HIPAA requirements. Mental health parity has been a really hot topic. I think it's going to continue to be there. Mental health parity has required since 2021 that employers have a group health plan that can pass an NQTL analysis. That analysis is going through your plan with a fine-tooth comb. It's ensuring that individuals who have a mental health or substance use disorder get the exact same benefits as somebody who has a medical or surgical need. Now, there were some changes in 2024. The Trump administration put a non-enforcement for those 2024 changes. There's a couple of key things to keep in mind with that non-enforcement. One, they didn't change the rule. They didn't change the law. They've just actively said we're not going to enforce the policies that the Biden administration put in place in 2024. But it's a light switch. It's a light switch that at any point in time can be turned back on and be enforced. But what the 2024 changes does not change is the requirement of that NQTL analysis. And honestly, there's been a misconception with the NQTL analysis that it is also non-enforceable right now. Unfortunately, that is just not the case. The NQTL analysis is required and it can be enforced. Fully insured, most carriers are handling that for the employer. Level funded, it's kind of a mixed bag. Some carriers are doing it, some carriers are not. Self-funded, most employers have to complete that analysis themselves. It's an expensive analysis though, and I'm sorry to tell you that. Much like going out to lunch, the increase to that cost is significant. Last year, we were telling employers somewhere between $8,000 to $12,000. This year, we're telling employers to expect to kind of start at that $12,000 mark. But plan assets can pay for that. We're also going to see some changes with Medicare Part D. This year for 2026, I'm calling this our limbo year. And what I mean by our limbo year is there are two simplified method determination tests that are available in 2026. You had the old method that required a plan to be designed to pay at least 60% of that Medicare coverage. Or not Medicare coverage, designed to pay at least 60% of the prescription drug coverage. In 2027, we are going to be forced into the new simplified method. The new simplified method is going to require that your plan pay at least 72% of prescription drug coverage. So we're jumping from 60% to 72% between the two tests. This year, you can do both tests or one or the other. Next year, the old test will go away and that 72% will be the one that we have to test against. The reason this is important for employers is sometimes you might have a higher population of Medicare eligible individuals who have continued to delay Medicare eligibility because your plan is creditable. If your plan switches from creditable to non-creditable, no harm, no foul from the employer, you don't have to offer a creditable plan. But what is that going to do to your population? Are you going to have an uprising of a lot of upset Medicare eligible individuals? If you think that is going to be a problem for you, start having that conversation now so that you can be having a proactive conversation of what 2027 looks like to ensure you maintain creditable coverage, or maybe you start telling your employees now, there is a chance we will not be able to maintain creditable coverage in 2027 if it's not something you're going to push to keep. Machine readable file requirement, those are still here, whether it is your carrier, your TPA, or possibly you as the employer, you should have those hosted somewhere or hosted on your behalf on a public facing website. I strongly encourage every employer to know if somebody is hosting it for you or not. If it's a question you haven't asked before, send the email today to say, hey, do we know who is hosting machine readable files? Is this something we should be doing as the employer? RxDC reporting is due June 1st. Fully insured and many level funded clients should have already received and completed an RxDC survey for your carrier. They're asking you your plan year information, your premium and cost sharing information, and then they'll take that data and aggregate it with the data that they have about your 50 most drugs, your prescription rebate information, and then e-file on your behalf by June 1st. Many self-funded clients can work with their TPAs or maybe their PBMs, those third-party administrators or those prescription benefits managers, to maybe do a survey or maybe collect data, but there is a chance you might have to file on your own. Make sure you know who's on first and make sure you have a plan in place prior to that June 1st deadline. If I mentioned a survey and you're thinking, oh, I don't think we did that, or I don't remember getting it, reach out. There are avenues to still help you meet that June 1st deadline. The gag clause attestation is still due by December 31st every year. Fully insured carriers typically will complete this on your behalf. Level funded and self-funded might have to be completing it by themselves. The good news is that only takes about 3 minutes, and you're simply attesting that there are no gag clauses in your contracts with your carriers or those TPAs or PBMs. Right, so we've made it through the big chunk of the employee benefits. Now we're going to move over to some HR updates and just some AI use in HR. Now you'll see we do have a lot of information to talk about, but in some ways, it feels like we don't have anything to talk about at all. Throughout this deck, you're going to see a little bit of just what ifs, ideas, things for you to take back in place. Because the real truth here is no regulations have really changed, no rules have changed, but you're going to see where the enforcement of these rules have changed. I like to talk about when you're speeding and you have your Waze that comes up and says, oh, hey, somebody detected a police officer. So we all kind of slow down. But when we don't see the police officer, we all speed back up, only to find him 5, 10, 15 miles down the road. The law didn't change, the speed limit didn't change, but where it's being enforced is what has changed. And that's really where I kind of feel like the shakeup between the NLRB, the EOC, and our current administration leaves employers. It's just where are they going to enforce it and why? Last year, we talked a lot about the different changes. One day, Gwen Wilcox had a job. The next day, she didn't have a job. While there are still a lot of lawsuits going on through that, we probably maybe won't know until the end of this year, possibly next year, of how her future really shakes out. This just shows that there was a lot of confusion for employers. Essentially, the referee for your game was fired. The coach fired him. You don't know who's on first. You don't know if you can pull at helmets or not pull helmets. Nobody's calling it if you do. And employers are just hoping for the best when it comes down to enforcement. We also had a point where we didn't have quorum between the NLRB and the EEOC. There was no quorum, so they couldn't do their jobs. We do have quorum again. The NLRB had 2 new members who were confirmed in December. They are both Republicans. We now have a Republican majority when it comes to the NLRB. The expectation here is we think that they're going to follow with the Trump administration's plans and ideology, but we do expect an employer-friendly posture under this new majority. EOC also has quorum again, but they also have a Republican majority. And knowing that we have Andrea Lucas, who is she's very much decided, she's doing what she said she was going to do, but she's going to do it with a bang. And she is going to continue to advance the Trump administration priorities. Now that they have that Republican majority, we don't expect that to change. What I think is important for employers to think about is the precedent that has been set here. Prior to the current administration, we had a 90-year precedent that said Congress can limit removal to for cause. Presidents should not be terminating any independent agency members at will. That's being reversed. If these lawsuits hold up, and if Gwen Wilcox continues to not have a job, are we really allowing now every future president to terminate independent agency members at will? Because if that's the case, we should all buckle up. That means every time we have a new administration, that president is going to come in, terminate the board members they don't want so that they get the majority that they want so that they can continue with their ideas and their hopes for their administration. This is a big deal for employers. You could be sitting in a place where every 4 years, your roadmap is going to change. We already have enough change, let alone if now we're going to have that change that's going to align with each president going forward. These boards are supposed to be independent for a reason. They're supposed to be some sort of sounding board, gut checks, and presidents may or may not have that future removal power, but this is something I would say all employers should keep an eye on. Now, I mentioned Andrea Lucas. She really has just come out with a bang. She said she was going to come out and do all of the things and she was going to do it loudly, and she has. In December, she made a post asking if you are a white male who has experienced discrimination at work based on your sex or your race. Essentially, give her a call. She wants to know. It is the first time the EEOC has ever actively solicited reverse discrimination charges. And it was reposted by the vice president. More than 5 million views on X from this one post. And I'm sure that is much higher at this moment. This just really shows the difference we have from prior administration to current administration. They are really looking in the EOC to root out all DEI motivated discrimination. They are really looking at, okay, your DEI program was so far one way, we want to know what happened to the people who weren't part of that DEI program. And we're going to ask them, we're going to ask if they feel like your program was something they were discriminated against. When we look at what's on the internet, you know, I always tell the story that I am the worst mother in Indiana, and I say that because we don't let our kids have social media. They get it when they turn 18. Our daughter got it when she turned 18. Our son is still 2 years away from that. So that's why we still have that title. And we say that because we don't feel like our children understand that when they put something on the internet, you can't take it down. And in all honesty, you know, yesterday in a webinar or seminar, somebody said adults don't either. And when you look at social media, that's right. Adults don't either. We're seeing adults lose their job because of what they post on social media. Well, the EOC is taking that into account, and they're looking at what employers post on social media or what they had posted and took down and thought they can't see anymore. They're looking at old websites, anything where somebody took a screenshot or it's still sitting out in the archives to determine, okay, did this employer have a strong DEI program? One, are they still doing it and hiding it, and it's something we should investigate? Or did they drop it simply because the administration changed and it really shows that the intent of the previous DEI program was not actually in the best interest of their employees? It was just simply to collect points with the federal government. But that's what the EOC is currently targeting. They're looking at what used to be posted on the internet to see, is this somebody we want to investigate? As an employer, if you're sitting there listening to this, I strongly encourage you to review your DEI program, update your employment policies, look at the documentation you have around your decision making. Is your decision making got a business justification? Is it race or sex neutral? Or are all your justifications based on one race or one sex? Where is your paper trail for promotions and hirings and terminations? And please prepare for increased scrutiny. This is something that the current administration is strongly looking at. We are going to see more and more lawsuits based on DEI programs and based on reverse discrimination. When you're looking at your program liability, we understand it kind of feels like whiplash a little bit, but definitely look at these as like your high or medium risk when you're looking through those programs and where to kind of focus going forward. But I'm not saying that all DEI programs are bad. I'm not saying go in, wipe out all your programs, get rid of them all, and don't follow them. There are still some states who have state law requirements. Our friend California is one of them. Colorado, there are several that say that employers have to have some sort of a DEI program. And in some cases, they can prevent other discrimination lawsuits, or they can help address the bias that we as humans are just naturally going to have. And it does attract new talent and helps retain talent. But you have to look at the other side. Did your DEI program swing so far one way that now you're discriminating against a whole other class of individuals? We have to make sure everybody is truly being involved and everybody is looking at promotions and programs that could be available, not just one race, not just one sex. You really have to do everybody. This is just a practical guide of looking at competing obligations and how to manage those, because I understand me sitting here and telling you all of these obligations probably just makes you want to bang your head against the wall. What I want you to know is documentation is your friend in 2026 and 2027. We talked about lawsuits where in those lawsuits, Not having the right documentation is what has harmed those larger employers. Documentation is important for all groups, regardless of your size. You need to focus on equal opportunity across the board. Eliminate quotas and targets, especially when it comes to DEI programs. Broaden your eligibility. Have a documented business justification. Emphasize compliance with your managers and those who are promoting this program. And get legal counsel to review it. If you have a program in place and you feel safe and secure, great. What's the harm of having legal counsel review it just to ensure you do have some sort of privilege with somebody who says, yes, we think that this is something that, yes, it could be looked at, it could be scrutinized, but we don't think there's anything enforceable against your current program. We have 50 new laws taking effect across all the US states, and that's just as of a couple of weeks ago. I'm sure this is much higher now. We are seeing more and more come out almost every single week. We had 19 states who increased their minimum wages above the $15 an hour milestone. And we are seeing states come out and continue with a surge of implementing AI discrimination protections as well. What this means is if you are in multiple states, your job is getting harder, unfortunately. You need vendors and you need partners that are looking at the landscape that you have for all of your employees to ensure that you have access to these new laws and new requirements and are able to determine what best fits your employees and how you run your current business. The minimum wage forecast, this just looks at the 6 states who went over that $15. We know California is at the $16.90. They also have a healthcare requirement that gets put on top of that. But this is important because we're going to show you some court cases where some employers didn't look at certain city ordinance requirements or state minimum wage requirements and paid their employees the wrong rate, and they had to pay sizably to those back payroll rates. We see paid family leave and medical leave requirements coming up all over the place. We're also seeing expansions to those who are already in place. We have 4 new ones with expansions, and we have several new states coming up with new obligations later this year. Make sure you're getting notifications from our absence management team here at Hub. They present and they give out information to clients and prospects to say, hey, this is coming down the line. Make sure you're aware if you have employees that sit in these states. But it's also important that you truly know where your employees sit. I have a lot of conversations with employers where they have one employee in California who might get forgotten about because there's just one remote employee in California or one in New York or New Jersey. Where your employee sits from an employment law standpoint and HR standpoint matters. Unlike benefits, it's basically where your plan is cited out of or where you as the employer have written that contract out of. Employment law and HR is going to be where they sit, where they're doing their job, and that can get confusing if you only have 1 or 2 who might possibly fall through that crack. California, it's California. We love it. We love the sun, but man, they have a lot of rules and regulations. They had a new one start this year for workers' comp immigration and organizing of that. It was due by February 1st to all their employees. That is a new annual notice for employers who have employees in California. They had minimum wage changes. They have a new AI discrimination ban. There's a lot of things happening there, but if you don't have a lot of employees there, you might not always have those key insights. If this feels like new information, reach out. We're happy to help find that for you. A couple of just small, quick overview changes of a couple of different states. Illinois now has a lactation break requirement for pay that must be paid. New York has an exempt salary minimum increase. Oregon is looking at striking employees being eligible for unemployment. Pennsylvania came up with a Crown Act that says employers and employees cannot discriminate against somebody who is wearing their natural hair into work. Interesting that we need that. We're bullying our friends so much that the state has to come out and say, hey, if people are wearing their natural hair, you cannot discriminate against them. But these are the things that we're seeing that are smaller and may not come right into the top of your inbox that you want to keep an eye on or have somebody who's looking at when you're in those states. I love the South. I love the lawsuits that we get from the South because I think that they really teach us a lesson. That's why I think the Southern cases matter. And I think they matter outside of just the South. I think other parts of the country learn lessons from there as well. We have very large verdicts, 366 million. We've got a 466 million. We have a lot of major cases that come up on an annual basis. The EEOC is very active in the South. And we want to look at what makes us different. We have at-will employment. We have a large industry mix, generous juries, and then we still have the federal law that's going to apply over everything. So it gets to be a lot of fun when we're looking at these different cases and what's really drawing with them. We had a FedEx case for discrimination last year out of Houston. This is where FedEx had a former African-American sales rep, fantastic at her job. Everybody loved her. She was hitting her quotas. She was meeting them every single year. She got a new manager. We've all had those times where maybe we don't get along with our manager or there's some sort of confliction there. But this new manager came in and decided to raise her quota. She raised her quota because she said, look, if you're already meeting your quota on a regular basis and it's not really a goal anymore for you, it's just your everyday, we should raise it. So it was raised. There was a lot of conflicts that happened. Eventually, she was managed out of her position. She sued. She sued and she won $366 million. This is one of the largest race discrimination settlements we have ever seen. When we're looking at this, the thing that fed this was one person. There was one other female who was not African American who had a smaller quota than this woman did. Discovery ended at that point. It didn't matter what anyone else in the company had. It didn't matter what the men had. There was one female from an opposite race with a smaller quota than she had. That's how small we're talking when we're saying do not discriminate. Try to get rid of the targets and the quotas when it comes to DEI, because one person can cost an employer $366 million. We have a lot of patterns in the South, a lot of discrimination, a lot of harassment. Apparently, we can't stop bullying our friends and we can't keep our hands to ourselves. We have FMLA cases, we have race harassment, hostile work environment, pregnancy discrimination, sexual harassment, all things that we could put in some management training, we could set zero tolerance for with employees to maybe hopefully start counteracting this pattern that we have seen in the South. We have a mixed industry, but oil and gas industry primarily ends up being field employees. Having field employees is like having a car accident and not having a dash cam. And what I mean by that is it's a he said, she said. You don't know if the person before you really brake checked you or reversed into you because there's no video of it. You can't say for sure if somebody is bullying somebody or harassing somebody, or maybe they're just retaliating because the other person started it. Liberty Oilfield Services had a lawsuit where a Black mechanic and two Hispanic workers had created a hostile environment against each other. There were racial slurs, there was just overall harassment. They made a claim. The claim to HR was, we don't have oversight in this field. We're being told one person started it, the other is saying the other person started it. We don't know what to do. The answer is, you've got to figure out what to do. You've got to get oversight. You've got to have a zero tolerance policy for these field employees, because unfortunately, field employees or remote employees know HR has limited oversight. So there's got to be a way to find a balance where you do have that oversight without micromanaging. I'm not saying turn on people's Teams camera. Please don't do that to people. Yes, they should be on camera when they're in video and things of that nature. But if they're at home and you're just randomly turning on their camera, That's a little weird, but there has to be some way to have oversight so you can get to a point where you do have that dash camera. A couple other just lawsuits we're seeing throughout the South. We've got them in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, the Carolinas, but the same concept, discrimination, harassment. It is a theme across the entire South. What makes our Southern cases so different? Most of the South is an at-will employment state. At-will means that an employer can fire for any reason, or you don't have to have a reason, but you can still fire for a bad reason, because at-will does not mean you are exempt from federal law. You cannot fire for discriminatory reasons. You cannot retaliate against somebody who has a protected activity. You cannot violate FMLA laws, ADA laws, Title VII. All of those federal protections still fully apply. And sometimes with the at-will employment, it's a myth where employers think that they can just fire for any reason. You can, but you have to make sure that your reasons are not bad reasons and that they don't violate those federal requirements, because you are still bound by them. I've had many conversations where employers are looking at termination because somebody's on a leave. When we dig into the leave, I find out they haven't offered FMLA yet, but the employee is eligible for FMLA. And the question digs a little deeper. Why aren't we offering FMLA? Well, we just don't really want to, or we haven't done it yet, we didn't think about it, or we don't think that they're going to want it anyways. None of those reasons matter. If you terminate somebody when they should have been eligible for FMLA, even as an at-will employer, you can still be sued because you have now violated their FMLA rights. Our juries are also known for providing massive awards. $366 million, $146,000 for pregnancy discrimination because an employer wouldn't offer a chair to a pregnant female. FMLA retaliation, employee was terminated and treated poorly because they did want their FMLA rights that the employer had not previously offered to them. These are big amounts. These are amounts that can bankrupt employers, and this just shows that our juries are really trying to make an example out of employers who are not complying with federal laws. We have a large mix of different industries. We have oil and gas, automotive, food processing, manufacturing. We have a lot of employees with repetitive movement, so they might need an AD accommodation or they might need FMLA. Ironically, automotive dealerships have the most sexual harassment. Oil and gas, we're looking at more racial harassment. Those manufacturers, those repetitive actions, those are the AD accommodations, things that we're seeing not happening. And then the disability issues with food processing, kind of the same concept. When we look at all of the most common issues, all we're saying is look at your employees. Look at your policies, look at your managers who are applying these policies. Do they understand the why behind them? We recently did a why training. HR asked me to come in and do a why training for their managers. Why does HR always have to know when somebody's out sick? Why do they have to know when somebody's, having surgery? And explain to them so that maybe it would make them want to comply with those questions that they're being asked to comply with if they knew why they needed those answers. It's important that everybody involved has this information. But again, the EEOC is very active throughout the South region. We kind of got a year where we didn't really get a break, but it was kind of, the can was kicked down the road. They're catching up with that 2025 work, and we do not expect them to slow down. We do expect that 2026 will also have just as many high volume active cases as well. Abandon your at-will myths. If you are sitting there thinking, oh yeah, we can fire whenever we want, please abandon those. Figure out a policy and a procedure for zero tolerance when it comes to slurs or any sort of discrimination or harassment. Find a way for your field workers to feel protection and to give your HR team that protection as well. You want to document everything. ensure everyone is complying with FMLA. That is a big one. Some fun cases to think about. We have the Mobley versus Workday. Essentially here, this is where AI is your vendor. And if you remember earlier, I said you are liable for your vendors. You outsource the work to them, not the liability. AI is the same. You are still liable if your AI is working or is not working. This is a case where the AI was taking on the employer's unconscious bias. It was looking at who the employer had hired in previous years, who they had chosen for interviews, and it was taking their bias and putting it in the applications that they were providing to the employer. So employees who maybe didn't meet the same demographics in this case, this individual went to a historically Black college, didn't get the interview because AI assumed that the employer didn't want to hire somebody who went to a Black college. AI is looking and learning from you. We also can't use the I didn't know argument anymore. I've told people almost probably every day this year, I didn't know doesn't work in anything anymore. When you're speeding down the road and you get a speeding ticket, the officer doesn't care if you knew the speed limit or not. You were speeding, you're still going to get that ticket. We see a lot of independent contractors working and employers saying, well, I didn't know that, them getting group benefits meant that they were an employee, or I didn't know that they were actually wearing a uniform. The IRS, the DOL, they don't care anymore. You must have a written classification policy for somebody who is going to be an independent contractor. Strongly recommend you retain legal counsel to look at that. You should be running the analysis that the DOL puts out, the worker control assessment. There are obligations that you have that you should be documenting so you don't have that I didn't know discussion. You also have responsibility as an HR team or an employer when somebody is off duty. And what I mean by off duty is there was a harassment case where a male employee said that they were being harassed off duty by a female coworker. They were getting nude photos, they were getting propositioned for sex, offered drugs, phone calls, showing up at his house. A lot of just uninvited communication was happening. The employee reported it to HR and his program director. HR essentially has been sued for not having an adequate response itself. When we look at somebody who has a responsibility, this employee has a hostile work environment now. Yes, it might be happening off duty, but you have one employee who's created a hostile work environment for another employee. It is not something that can just be pushed under the rug or forgotten about. There has to be action that is taken. There has to be an investigation. Otherwise, employers can have separate violations for having an inadequate response. Anytime you're looking at claims that are being made, make sure you have a documented process for how investigations are going to happen. Start that investigation. Discipline the harasser for their harassment. Maybe it's not always immediate termination, but you have to show the employee who has made the claim that there is not a hostile work environment or that you have zero tolerance for somebody who is creating a hostile work environment. Reverse discrimination claims are something I think is going to be top of the list in 2026 and 2027. The Ames versus Ohio Department of Youth Services actually kind of paves the road for this. Previously, anyone who had a reverse discrimination claim had a higher evidentiary burden for those plaintiffs. This case says that that's no longer the case. They did not require that higher evidentiary burden. They said in a reverse discrimination claim, it should be just as easy to make their case as a not reverse discrimination claim. I think this is going to really pave that road for all reverse discrimination claims that the EEOC is currently actively pursuing and requesting. Disney was sued. They had a $233 million settlement because they did not follow the local Anaheim wage ordinance. As I mentioned, states, cities inside of those states, sometimes even counties inside of them have their own requirements, and sometimes that can be a wage ordinance requirement. You have to make sure that you know where your employees sit and what state or city laws apply to them. Over the course of 4 years, Disney found themselves paying $233 million of back pay to over $50,000 employees, or 50,000 employees, not dollar employees. They also had to pay interest to those individuals and pay a penalty. So this just says it doesn't matter how large you are, you can still owe those back payments to your employees. FedEx had a tough year. And when we say FedEx had a tough year, they also had a driver misclassification case as well. This one was to the sum of $466 million. They had employees who they called independent contractors. They wore FedEx uniforms. They drove the FedEx trucks. They had their set schedules and routes provided by FedEx, and they followed the company procedures like any other W-2 employee was, but they were considered independent contractors. The DOL essentially said, nice try. You are controlling these individuals. They are not independent contractors. These individuals are employees. When we look at misclassification tests, this is important because it's not just back pay or interest or penalties you're going to owe. You have to make those individuals whole as if they were a W-2 employee. That means you might have to pay for missed benefits that they could have gotten, matches for their 401k or retirement plans, PTO, vacations, sick time. All of that gets accounted in these settlements, and you have to make that individual whole as if they had been a W-2 employee that entire time. So really make sure you're looking at anyone you're considering an independent contractor. And please remember, independent contractors are not employees and should not be on your group health plan. AI hallucinations. I love to say AI is my best friend and my arch enemy all at the same time. And that is because, unfortunately, AI is never going to be 100% correct. AI is learning. It pulls from a lot of sources, and we all know there's a lot of fake and incorrect information out on the internet. The courts are now starting to make examples of attorneys or anyone else who is using AI and not checking it. We had an attorney who had a $10,000 sanction simply because they didn't check what AI did. The attorney had AI generate all of their briefs, all of their documentation for a case, and unfortunately, it hallucinated some of those cases, meaning it made them up. They didn't even exist. Or it took the conclusion of a case and changed it a bit so that it wasn't actually what came from that case, but it allegedly worked for this attorney's case. The judges are no longer willing to say, oops, we made a mistake. They're going to start penalizing and having real consequences for individuals who are acting like AI is a human and not double checking their work or passing their work off as their own. So that leads us right into AI and employment. We've seen over 30 million applications processed through AI. We've seen hundreds of discrimination complaints, and we are seeing more and more states now come up with their own comprehensive AI laws. From a federal landscape, there's still a lot of uncertainty. Previously, we were told there wouldn't be federal regulations when it came to AI. That is drastically changing. We do expect a good landscape from the federal government on what that has to look like, where it can apply, where it can't. They're going to look to kind of nationalize some sort of an AI framework. But through that, we're still going to see the states because the federal is not going to invalidate any of the state laws. It's important for employers to understand the AI bias and discrimination. It really does learn from you. If you are biased in what your current work is doing, it knows that. If you only hire from certain zip codes and not from other zip codes, it's learning that. It's not going to show you the zip code applicants for the people you don't typically hire from. You aren't going to be able to say, well, our vendor did that or the software did that, it wasn't us. But you also have to look at how it's talking and how you're talking to it because it wants to make you happy. So if you tell it it's wrong, but it's really right, it's going to come back with a new answer because it's trying to work with you. It wants to give you what you're looking for. When we look at black box versus outside of the black box, We're talking about your firewall. If you're allowing AI in your workforce, is your AI allowed in your firewall or outside of your firewall? Because if it's outside of your firewall, it's really that black box of the internet where everything's out there, anyone can find it, it's really public record. Inside of your firewall, you have a little more protection. But when we're looking at inside of your firewall, are there rules? Because everybody has access to ChatGPT or all these other sites. Do you only have certain apps that you allow your employees to use? And if so, do you have a policy around that that says what's going to happen if they don't? Do you have any sort of an analysis? Are you pressure testing that AI? Are you putting your own applications and changing zip codes and changing colleges to make sure? Are you telling your employees that they have to say when they're using AI or when they're not? Are they allowed to just copy and paste and move on with their day? Those kind of rules should be inside of that policy to help with some of the discrimination, and just knowing that AI bias for you and all of your staff is really important. Please don't rely on your vendor reliance. You have to really dig in, ask the questions, get the documentation, get the proof, find out where the verification is coming from, find out where there's human oversight from your vendor to know where your human oversight needs to be. There should be no AI that is running without human oversight. It's going to make errors. You have to have somebody that's keeping an eye on it. AI is meant to make us better at what we already are experienced in. It is not meant to make individuals attorneys who didn't go to law school. It is not meant to make you an expert in something that you don't already have that experience. It is just meant to help make you efficient at what you're currently doing. But make sure you have the policies, the procedures, the documentation from your vendors, and all of your employees are adequately trained on how you allow AI use in the workforce. The most common kind of pitfalls that we see are individuals not doing due diligence, not having that oversight, or not providing notice when AI is being utilized, not demanding that transparency, lack of documentation, and lack of auditing those programs on a regular basis. If you're in multiple states, you will start hearing more and more about those states coming up with different rules and different requirements. Within those states, what I recommend is you have two options. The first option is that you can say, okay, we're going to have a different rule for each of those states, and any state that doesn't have the rules, we're just not going to have one. Or you can have a more national standard approach where you take the most strict requirements from each of those states, and that is the platform that you follow. That might be a little more administratively easier for the HR team to follow and for your employees to follow, but you certainly can do the other option as well. All right, we're down to the final minutes. A couple of key takeaways. It's going to be broken up in both sections, but when we look back to what we talked about in the beginning, the cost pressure is real. I know that it has been a trying renewal season for a lot of employers, but please know that you're not alone. Please know that there are a lot of employers going through the same thing. And here at Hub, we are going through it with you in a way we're trying to strategize, get creative, find ways to help you mitigate those costs. Just help by bringing in all of the information, coming to the table with an open mind of creativity and realizing we just can't do what we did 5-10 years ago, but also being a good fiduciary, making sure that you're building that fiduciary file. You're not making exceptions to your plan. You're not discriminating or allowing harassment around your plan, and you are willing to comply with the federal compliance requirements, ACA, mental health parity, HIPAA, all of those things that we've kind of talked through today. And then realize all the different states, the different rules, it's getting more and more complex from a state perspective to be in multiple states, but we're still here to support you. Whether it's from a compliance standpoint or an absence management standpoint, we have a lot of multi-state tools that we can provide to you, or at least give you the research for those states when we know that you're going to be in those states. We know you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty, and our goal is just to be a good partner and to help you feel calm through these uncertain times. Just know that we're here. All you have to do is ask those questions, but as your compliance practice leader, I'm always here to support you through anything we have discussed today or that we discuss in the future. We really appreciate everybody joining us. I know an hour and a half of your time is a lot of time. Please do not hesitate to follow up if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. We want to be the partner that you need to drive your workforce forward. Thank you.